Hello, everybody. We have a special guest. We have Dr. Dario Nardi, and he's going to be talking about chakras today and how you could use exercises to be able to exercise these chakras. So, welcome to this channel.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leon, for having me. And, I guess with a topic like this, to say the word chakras even, and people will either maybe be true believers, they do yoga, something like that, even if they think of it metaphorically, or they sort of snicker. And they especially wonder, like, how could someone with a neuroscience background, like myself, be like, quote, into chakras or something like that. And so I hopefully today I can really connect it, not to some woo-woo kind of science, but just connected to stuff we know about the autonomic nervous system, and then the exercises, some of which are even FDA approved exercises,
Right.
believe it or not, um, for getting more in touch with our bodies and helping to alleviate anxiety or depression or something like that.
Yes. And how did you get interested in this work?
Well, I had an experience, and at first I thought I had gone to a party, which is the strangest thing. And I want to say before that I had been doing some yoga and some other like a tantric yoga kinds of things. A tantric, by the way, doesn't always mean sex related. It's just the whole body of yoga by itself, and Kundalini. And I had gone to this party, and when I came home, I couldn't sleep for like 3 days, and I thought, did somebody drug me? And I called a friend of mine, and we went down the symptoms, and she's like, I don't know what this is, but this isn't anything that I would be aware of.
What kind of symptoms do you have?
So there was this feeling, like a column of energy going like up and down my spine, and my whole body felt like warm and sort of tingly. And thank God I didn't send any text messages or emails besides to my friend that first, like that evening, because I would have said like the craziest things in retrospect. And it was like 3 or 4 days later that I was like, it got coherent enough, and I slept. And I'm not normally, by the way, I normally sleep really well. Like I'm like to bed at midnight, and that's
Mhm.
even if I go out to party, I'm still in bed by midnight. And I started looking in the internet, and they were talking about Kundalini Awakening, and I had heard of this term before, going to yoga classes and so on,
Mhm.
and it just like boom, 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 like it just fit all of the symptoms.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I don't really know what to do with that. But long story short, I started investigating a little bit more. I asked on a forum, does anybody know anything relationship to like personality or psychology and this Kundalini or yoga? And one of my colleagues, Nicole Gruel, who's in Australia, she's like, yeah, Carl Jung wrote this book on the psychology of Kundalini.
Yes.
And
I always find it so funny with Jung. You feel like you've read everything about him, and then he's into something else. He's yet into another thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's I feel it's Jung with yoga, as in young. You stay young as
Yes.
long as you keep investigating and find something new. And I want to say, I found out. So he had gone to India, and apparently hung with some gurus and so on, um, and came back and gave talks on the topic. And there was an Indian guru who actually either came back with him or sometime later who was at the talks, and he said to Young, he's like, like nobody in the audience understands what you're talking about. Like they think that they do, but they don't, because they haven't had the experience. They're very disconnected from their bodies and from their psychology, and because the psychology is only in their head, it's a cognitive. And so I
Yes.
would say that the Kundalini yoga, breath work, all these body mind practices, that's what they are, body and mind. And in the chakra work, I would say is that when people start to do these body mind practices, the nervous system sort of opens up in the sense that like the mind becomes more aware, like you become consciously more aware of what's going on. From people understand like breathing, heart rate, but we have a whole autonomic nervous system, and 80% of the signals in that nervous system run upward from the body into the brain, but we're mostly unaware of those, except maybe sometimes with extreme grief, or like we get like really bad feeling about somebody in our stomach. What obviously during sex, like there's like actually a lot of people remain sort of frozen during sex too. They don't open up. So as people report the experiences, you can see where this framework of chakras came from, because it's just a language to describe the different regions of the nervous system, and like a part saying like something is happening here or something is happening here. And when you really do the work, then the whole body, you sort of gain this awareness,
Yes.
and it's an actual like a cognitive awareness. And then the idea when they say like work with energy, a lot of that just means like toning down the limbic system, like the fight or flight response or the PTSD response, the monkey mind that comes with that, and then like turning on the parasympathetic response in the nervous system. So I see it, honestly, in a very like with meditation, in hypnosis, which are actually not, like they're real things that people have investigated and published studies, and so you can just think of the chakras as this gateway language to help understand like what's happening to me as I'm doing this work, these daily practices.
Yes, and it's pretty surprising the degree of correspondence with the signs that the chakras have.
Yeah, yeah, and to some extent, it's funny. So one of the things I was reading about was there are some exercises in Kundalini yoga, and they'll describe in a book, or the teacher will say like, "Oh, these are for like, lowering depression or anxiety or calming the mind or whatever it is." And then you go look on this FDA website about what are approved practices, actually physical practices, as opposed to like a pill or something for relieving depression or anxiety. And there are things like, dunking a person's face in cold water. There are these things, and it's like, not that specific one, but generally there's like a half dozen things. I'm like, oh, these are all exercises in Kundalini yoga that some dude brought from India.
Yes.
And so there really is this basis or correspondence. And I think on top of that, a lot of stuff can get added. A lot of it was actually added by Westerners beginning in the late 19th century. That isn't actually part of any actual Hindu or Sikh or Buddhist tradition.
Yes.
So that's where like the weird, like sort of sometimes off-putting stuff comes. It's actually not
Yes.
from the East. It's actually from Theosophy people 130 years ago.
The
So
the what
it's
people?
so the Theosophy was like this spiritual
Oh,
movement in the late 19th century. Yeah, none there's anything wrong with that either. But it just like there's the science part of it. There's the actual Eastern tradition parts, and then there's like this Western add-on layer that is come later. Like the yoga that's taught in your typical yoga class, like barely qualifies as yoga.
mhm.
Like I mean, it is hatha yoga is hatha yoga, but the meaning of it has been lost.
Yes.
And that it still teaches discipline and patience and the toning and the good stuff. Um,
What do you feel like is lost in it?
so I was talking to just a few days ago to the CEO of a teacher training school for yoga in San Diego, and they have over 2,000 students currently enrolled for over this past year.
Hmm.
Um, COVID-19 had something to do with that, because they were looking, well, what can I do? Let me move from 2 to 300 hours or something like that. And he said, actually, a lot of these students who were trained elsewhere or maybe trained with them, he realized didn't understand the purpose of yoga, even though they had been teaching yoga, some of them for 5, 10 years, 15 years. Um, and it's about reaching, there are different words in different languages, but moksha, or unity, non-duality. Um, of course, it might be a person only has those as peak experiences. And then really the idea is to cultivate a practice of compassionate detachment, which might sound contradictory, but it's not. And that's, it's like, what is it? Keen sensory awareness of the infinite. That might sound contradictory, but it's actually not.
Yes.
In many ways, they're like the experience of a child, but from in a very adult context. And
Right.
is recapturing that. And a lot of it, the tradition speaks about Maya, which is illusion, the illusion of the world. Um, that Shakespeare talked about it. That what is it? All of us are but players on a stage, and we have scripts and props and costumes and some of the recent physics. And I'm not going to talk about quantum physics, heaven forbid, but it's not my area. But when we dig even lightly, when we go and read, we find out, most matter, like, I'm pressing the screen here,
Hmm.
that's actually empty space, or it's fuzzy space. There's
Hmm.
nothing actually solid there.
Right.
This is not actually solid. If we go and ask what atoms are made of, well, we find a smaller constituents. And when we dig deeper to what's called quantum chromodynamic level, we find out that what even we think of matter is over 90% energy. So that when you add it all up, it's really like 99.99999 something percent energy. Almost no matter at all, if any. And so, in a sense, the most astonishing thing is that you and I right now and the listeners, each of us is a blob of consciousness. Because that, we don't know what consciousness is, but we know we're conscious.
Right.
Whatever, it could be completely material, but we have it, whatever it is. And that's actually the only real thing, in a sense, besides energy itself. So I like to say, like, we are there, the universe is made of energy, the energy vibrates at different frequencies. That's not really, from physics point of view, that's not really debatable. Like, that's we can explore the options, but that's energy. Some of that energy is patterned. A
Hmm.
lot of it is patterned, and some of it is self-referential, which maybe
Yes.
means consciousness. I don't know. So really, the purpose of yoga is to get in touch with that
Hmm.
and to push away everything else, the world of its concerns and the trees and dogs and cars and the blue states and red states and football and all of that is temporary, and not that it doesn't impact us, because when we're on stage in the theater, the characters actions impact each other, but to remember at any moment we have the capacity to change our prop, to change the script, to change our costume, to go to a different stage, to say, oh, I'm going to throw the script away and I'm going to get off the stage.
Hmm.
And that's and maybe it's just it's theater within theater within theater.
Yeah.
And that's why I like to say that the old adage, I think there are two old adages that I'll end with, and they're both, they seem so funny and simple. And one of them is about the what is it, the old idea, what is the universe? It's turtles all the way down. And the turtles, yeah, because life is a bunch of questions that look hard on the outside and they have a soft underbelly.
Right.
And the more you go, just the more turtles you encounter. And that's okay, but it is a very interesting journey. And then the other I really love, which I feel is very much about yoga, is the European children's rhyme, row 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 your boat.
Hmm.
Row 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 your boat gently down the stream, merrily 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 merrily, life is but a dream. And so, where are we all heading? We're all in boats, and we're all in our streams, and we're all heading to the one ocean, and life is but a dream. And I don't mean that in a flippant way, it's just in that is a very deep truth to hold at the same time as we hold what Jung would call the definite world, which he
Right.
encouraged people to take seriously. And that's what I loved about Kundalini yoga in particular. It says, yeah, people, you do yoga to live happy life, healthy life, enjoy life, have pleasures, You need to make smart choices, all of that, but also holy life. And what does that mean? Not like following a set of rules, but being aware of the children's rhyme, or that we're all those blobs of consciousness. However, whichever road we want to take to understand that.
So can we talk about the chakras and what they represent, and what would be the? I know that when it comes to your book on Jung called Jung and yoga, you talk about each of the chakras, and then you also talk about exercises you could implement in order to be able to exercise them.
Yeah. So Jung was a psychiatrist, and he saw patients, and he also traveled a lot cross-culturally, internationally. And some people call him a mystic, but he denied that, and he said he just took psychology very, very seriously. He really wanted to figure out like what's going on with people and how can he really help his patients and all of that.
Right.
And so after he learned about the chakra framework, well, one is interesting in the talks because he had just been exposed. He gets some stuff wrong in retrospect, and he does correct himself like 20 years later, but that's neither here nor there. It's just a few like technical mistakes. I think the basic idea is fair. And one of them is that we can think of chakras as like resource centers and just like a conceptual framework, but also a body framework. To bring the body and emotions and mind and spirit, all of that into and social into our work for ourselves or with other people, whatever it is. And then the other, he said, was about development and developmental levels, both for individuals and for humanity as a whole. And because he said he felt that was important, you can't just talk about individuals without thinking about their context.
Right.
And so he gave lots of examples in his talks, although the talks, what motivated me is they're very difficult to follow, and things are out of order, and he always goes all over the place.
That's him.
Yeah. So I'm like, let's just put them in a nice, neat order, and take quotes, like lots of quotes. I have hundreds of quotes from there, but just like and make it a little bit more accessible in modern English. And I think both of them are useful. So he talks about, for example, the second chakra, Svadhisthana. And this, is traditionally associated with like the gut area. By the way, I learned a bit about anatomy in the process. So like the stomach is not down here. The stomach is actually like right below.
we cannot see any. The video camera is up here and up.
Yeah. So your stomach is actually up here, and your gut is what's all down here.
Right.
So like, the stomach is down here. No, it's not down there. So that was very educational. But he talks about his own childhood at that point, among several other things. So he says, notice that in like early cultures or indigenous cultures, what they called then like primitive cultures, which he didn't personally view as primitive. He's like, why is it they have coming of age ceremonies that are so grueling sometimes? Because they're really trying to create a physical experience. And he said, I can think of my own childhood when I was in school, and he said there was a row of us kids in school, and the teacher had a whip. Not like a nasty whip, but like, like horse hairs or whatever. And when we had to recite our ABCs, he's talking about when they were very little, the teacher would whip us each time we said them aloud. And he said the idea is because the teacher wanted us to have a physical association with what we were learning. And the tribal elders want the youth to have a physical association with what they're learning. And he gives other experiences. He talks about baptism, for example, the purpose of baptism of Christianity, and why you go into the water. Again, a very physical experience.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that with the world as is right now, there's a lot of this focus on education and learning and experiences as being cognitive and mental. And the benefit of these rituals is that they tap into the physical aspect of it. There's a way of being able to, you get to get insight through a physical experience. And we don't understand that these days.
Yeah. And I think that shows up a few ways. And one of them, he pointed out, he said, if you asked an ancient Greek where consciousness, where their awareness was, or consciousness, they would point to their chest. Of course, today, a person would point to their head. This is sort of what we're taught.
That's what it feels like in a way.
Yeah, right. And it makes sense. He talks about the Western culture and how the aspiration is actually to have us way up here. But he said, the ancient Greeks and other people put it in the chest. And he said, if you talk to somebody from like, tribal Africa or something like that, or even go way back in Europe, I mean, we would sort of guess because we don't know. If you ask where is consciousness, they might even point to their gut, because they would say, unless I feel it in my gut, it's not really that important, is it?
Yes.
Because love, if you really feel love, you will experience it in your gut.
Heart. In your gut.
Heart and right, that's right. If you experience fear, if you meet somebody you don't know and that experience with them puts your stomach into knots, then that's something to pay attention to.
Yes.
And so that's what he viewed, how we can view the chakras as like informational sources. And it's the same in acting. When I took an acting prep class, the teacher was like, you already need to know what you need to know in every scene emotionally. In fact, she said the biggest obstacle to acting is that people are in their head. Right. They think they're supposed to feel a certain way. You can't do that authentically.
They're going up here in order to dictate what they're doing.
Right. When you just want to find within yourself down here, in here where you are, and then it will come upward. It will flow upward, and it will come out authentically. In the voice and the eye movement, whatever it is. And that's where I discovered, for example, timing comes from in film. When it not just looks realistic in a static frame, but it is real when it's good, because it's real but in an imaginary circumstance, which is not so far from that idea of Maya and the world is an illusion and so on. So the one piece I want to add to this is the recent work. There's the book, for example, The Body Keeps the Score, and the relationship between like PTSD experiences, the limbic system, the distributed nervous system, and how the reaction patterns we have at the time that something happens get stored in the brain and in the nervous system, and we react the same way again each time a trigger situation happens. But we may disassociate from that in terms of awareness. Like our spotlight of awareness doesn't include the fact that we're getting tense and all of that, but it's happening. And so he's saying that the secret, I mean, in the book, I forget what his name is now, the author, but in The Body Keeps the Score, that a lot of trauma work requires the person sort of like vomit out or shake out, sweat out, scream out, whatever it is. That they need to get out, because it's still being stored down here, and those reaction patterns are there. And if you just talk to the person, you might, there are some techniques that are very genius, that redirect the person's attention and whatnot. Like Milton Erickson was a genius at shifting people and so on. But even then, he kept the whole body of the person in mind as he was working with them.
Right. Yes. So you'll find that when you could work with the chakras, that there's more of yourself in different centers of you, and it won't just be experienced in your head.
Yes. And I got to say, one thing that really struck me, I had just assumed for over 45 years of my life, or 35 years as a pubescent or post-pubescent adult, that it was just a metaphor to say, like, oh, your heart is going to flip, it's going to skip a beat or whatever, in that the romantic kiss or whatever it is. That's, by the way, that's a real thing. Like the heart can actually like feel like it flips over and it skips a beat, and And so when we unlock those spaces, in other words, when we allow our awareness to go down there, and at the same time loosen some of that what's called default mode network, that like contracts the awareness and the habits and all of that. When we loosen that by whatever means, then we can actually have more human experiences.
Interesting. Um, yeah. So you're saying that when you are feeling the sense of love, this love in a relationship, that you are actually feeling it in your heart, and it's not simply a metaphor. It's
Yeah,
experienced in your chest.
yeah, yeah, and that's it's like up until recently, the doctors, researchers referred to the placebo effect as something bad, that obscures the true results or the true impact of the pill or whatever it is. And only recently did it strike them that like, oh, the placebo effect does actually do something, and that's sort of really cool. That like up to 20% or more of healing can just be because the person believes, and that's going to stimulate. There are the nerves that go down. They recently discovered this after years of looking at human anatomy, like centuries of looking at human anatomy. They just discovered a few years ago that there's actually a pair of nerves that run from the prefrontal cortex down to the thymus, which is involved, especially in the young part of life, in immunity and the T cell formation and all of that. So when the whole nervous system extends down through the body and 80% of the signals are going upwards to inform the brain, and at the same time, we often have the spotlight that just focuses on this one little part of us. This is my task. This is who I am. This is what I believe. This is how I'm going to react. Wow, imagine if we can just loosen up that spotlight and allow the person to experience more.
Yes. So this is a different way of looking at the placebo effect in things such as hypnotism, in that people say, "Oh, it's something that is not real," in a way that its effect is it's there, but it's fake.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, it does more than just talking with somebody. So I remember they did experiments on animal magnetism to test whether it's real or not, and they kind of they put a person who does the animal mesmerism behind the subject, so the subject can't see them, and then the effect disappears, and they think, oh, there's that kind of proves that it's all like an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying is the presence of the person doing the animal magnetism, or the hypnotist, they're doing something that's activating something that's beyond our just cognitive level thinking.
Yeah, and it's not supernatural or something. It's just outside of our awareness,
Right.
and it's the trance is something that's worked. There's a reason why a lot of say like indigenous techniques. So you look at like Native American shamanism and sweat lodge, and that's an extreme experience that is meant in a way to break the person down a little bit, the ego structure. In shamanic drumming, where you have this repetitive 4/4 time drumming that takes the person's brainwaves down to like this theta delta state. And at the same time, there's a container that has suggestions in it. Suggestions in a very general sense, like I'm going on a mission, or I have my intention and it's to deal with this or that, or I'm staring at a focus like the fire or whatever it is. And this information comes forth from the unconscious, and it takes on a symbolic form, or it comes up as memories or whatever it is. And then, as part of it, the person is also sweating, and they might start reflexively like coughing or shaking or whatever it is. There's not too much of a physiological reason for them to do that. There's like a sort of stimulus catalyst to make that happen, but to help it along. But basically, it's like, what is the thought? Like a lot of trauma to get over, the person needs to shake it out, and that's like an animal. That's what animals do, and that's okay. That's part of how we function. And just because we don't know exactly how or why, except to say it's part of the autonomic nervous system, I think that's cool. That it just means we got a few more maybe decades of research to do, and then we'll be helping people even better. And it will turn out that all of those, like, shamans around the world for tens of thousands of years actually really knew smart stuff. They didn't know about, I don't know, like, antiviral medications or whatever, but they knew how to help people
Yes.
in a sort of deep psychological way. And that was, and I think that, people started to return to that. They're returning more to it in different ways. And so the chakras is just like a framework to help get started and to help people interpret what's going on. Like,
Right.
I feel here versus somewhere else. Um, and so that's, I think it's a great resource.
Yes. So, can we go through the chakras? So we start with chakra number one. What can you tell us about that chakra?
Well, so there's the chakra is a resource on chakra developmental level. And I'll give an anecdote. I'll try and give an anecdote about each one. So with the first chakra, that's called Muladhara, and it means root support. And I went rock climbing, and I went with a couple people and one of my good friends was the instructor. But I had never done this before, and we're out on an actual beach, and there's a cliff that's roughly like 100 feet up, and we have two support ropes, and the rocks are sort of rough, so there's enough space that you can sort of hang on with your fingers and your toes, and it comes to my turn, and I get about 10 feet up, which is actually not impressive because I'm already almost 6 feet tall. So I'm cheating already just with that. Um, and I was terrified. Like, every part of my brain was screaming, you're not supported, you're going to fall, you're going to die, what are you doing? There was a lot of fear. I knew, though, that other people in this climbing group are climbing this space. I knew that in the military, for example, they teach people how to do rappelling and whatever, and they gain confidence, and they learn how to overcome fear,
Mhm.
to act despite the fear. And it
Right.
is thought with the first chakra, the essence of it is the fear of death and obliteration and just a root support. It's like the tree that becomes uprooted. Now, fortunately, there was somebody, not my friend, but another student, who gave me some really great advice. And she says, as you climb, she says, well, these are the things that work for me. She says, one is that I close my eyes. I don't just mean I don't look down. I close my eyes because I don't need to move with my eyes. I need to move with my fingers and my toes. She says, the other is that I sing a song. And the song just carries me. And I just move in time with the song.
Interesting.
And there was a couple of other things, and I did these. So paying attention with the fingers and toes is so important because when we navigate with the eyes, we're navigating from our head. And with the fingers and toes, the toes are like at the bottom of the body, and the fingers, especially if they're upwards, that's like you're covering the whole thing in a way. And then with the energy comes in and out from the lungs, and it goes up to the throat, and it gives the monkey mind something to do. Even if the finger part isn't enough for it, it's at least got the song to keep it busy.
Right. So you're not going to the default network,
Right,
which
right.
is telling you all the fearful stuff. And I see that you have the whole body covered. You have the hands, and you have the feet, and then you have the center too, where the song comes from. And when we're stuck here behind our eyes, uh, for some reason, when we're trying to talk ourselves out of the fear, we start to feel the fear.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And so it's the second time around, and I am somebody who normally exercises, so that physically it's actually quite physically demanding too after a while because you use like your thighs and like your arms and everything a lot.
Mhm.
Um, and I managed to get, I don't remember what the distance was. It was maybe like 70 to 80% of the way up. So I think maybe about 75 feet in less than 10 minutes, including the very terrifying moment where you reached a spot, and I had seen other people do it, where you just can't continue because it's too smooth. So you have to jump away from the ledge looking down, seeing that there's nothing but solid sand underneath you. You leap away from the edge and you swing over to another part of the cliff where you can continue. Every part of my brain is telling me, don't do that. Like, what are you doing? You're going to die. And I managed to do it. And it was a beautiful experience. And I'm not an adrenaline junkie. I have been a couple of times since, like literally two other times since. But I feel like that's a lot of what the first chakra is about. Yeah. The second chakra is like I described, that there's this, as opposed to physical survival, a lot of it is about emotional life. And so there's very strong emotions, negative emotions, sometimes positive emotions that enter the body and are stored in that area that's, in the gut down to the groin. And a lot of people can become very locked there. They have, their core is weak, but it's also rigid. And so it's, how can then we not only build our core in a physical sense, but what kinds of things can we do in life that put emotional attachment to what it is, or emotional involvement, without getting carried away by the emotion. And the thought is that, there are multiple, answers about addiction, but one of them is that, addictions can be hard to kick when the person is seeking escape from the things that are stored so low in the nervous system. And so how do we get out of that? The third chakra is Manipura, and that is the land of golden jewels and fire. And Jung, and in the Hindu and the Sikh traditions, they talk about after the person finds success or enlightenment, the sun rises, that there is this fervor, this potentially, it's an amazing like flow of energy, like the person is on fire. When we talk about somebody who's passionate about their work, it can also be extremism. And
this is what in Buddhism, when they're referring to desire, this is what they're talking about.
Yeah, so a lot of it could be lower in the body as well, but it's that the person believes now they've awakened in a sense, because now they have enough retrospect to see, oh, there's more than just survival, and there's more than just like those basic emotional tribal interactions between people. There's something more. And that more like is such an amazing awakening. They believe that there's like a hole in the sky. And that hole in this from the sky is like where the truth comes down. And this does not point to any particular ideology. This is about any kind of ideology can then take hold of the person. And because it comes from the point of the solar plexus, which is the point for physical balance, that the person can spend a lot of time there because they feel balanced. This is a place in the, I'm not going to even get into this, but in the Viking cosmology, they have these 9 rune songs that are essentially like 9 chakra points, and there's like the weapon hand and then the shield hand. And this is all in this area here that feels like if this is strong, I'm going to lead here. Not with my heart, but with this righteous passion.
Right.
We know what happens, right? That this is the story of so many people, of times in societies, groups can get carried away in the space very easily.
Yeah. So one thing that I think you mentioned in the book, a lot of people are in this kind of energy field of the third chakra, and a lot of history of humankind is about the struggles between nations and groups and tribes due to the third chakra.
Yeah, and it is truly a step up from the second chakra in terms of it feels like it's more conscious, like because it's physically closer to the brain or the whatever.
It's very enlivening because the first two are almost like basically about I want to survive, and this one kind of is the first one that's really giving a sense of meaning to life.
Yeah, it gives meaning to life beyond survival and reproduction and village life, we might call it.
Right.
Nonetheless, what we do see in the great teachers that have come along, and the great teacher could be somebody living at the end of your block, but the official known ones like Jesus or Buddha or so on are usually talking about the fourth chakra, and that's the heart chakra. And there's a fundamental shift there because the heart chakra is about um, the metaphor I like to remind people, because I didn't know this, but now that I saw it, when you see like that heart shape that goes like this,
Right.
the heart isn't actually shaped like that. That shape actually came about from two hearts that are brought together and sewn together.
Wow.
So when you see the heart shape, that's actually two different hearts from
I
two
did not
different.
know that.
Yeah. So that's why it has that shape. The heart is about complementarity psychologically. It is about saying like, truth is not the truth with the big T is not the center of all things. Revelation, village life, survival. That there's something else that I'm willing to be vulnerable, to open up. And I think it's very beautiful that when we see iconography, like in the Eastern Orthodox or Catholic Church or in the Buddhism, you might see like a picture of a heart or a person, and the heart is on fire, or it's wrapped with thorns, or it has a sword through it. And even the notion of a heart that they're sewn together, like that doesn't sound pleasant. And that doesn't mean that life is without difficulty. It can be a place of joy, but it's also a place of vulnerability. To say, I'm not the center of things, nor is there some hole in the sky which is the center
Yes.
of things.
So the fundamental shift is that in the third chakra, we're still completely within the ego. And even if it's like you're trying to defend your group, it's really your idea of what is good for the group. What's your agenda for this group? And in fourth one's like you're really thinking outside of your own perspective
Yeah,
or
yeah.
feeling outside your own
Yeah.
perspective.
Psychologically, Jung said that in the third chakra, the reason that what is it? The motivating dynamic, the psychodynamic is projection. The person in third chakra denies everything about their nature that doesn't match the truth, the illumination, the ideology, the identity, whatever it is. And those demons need to be kept at bay. They're bad. You need to be cleansed of them. And when we push something down, all that we get back is going to be neurosis and projection and hypocrisy and defense mechanisms and all of that. And in the fourth chakra, the person is willing to say, oh, I have an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder. And I have an angel in me and a devil in me. And this person standing in front of me has an angel in them and a devil in them. And to use that metaphor. And or we can think of nature, and that nature has these seasons, and we're willing to say winter is part of life seasons.
Yes.
That fall and the death of things, the death of a child, the death of a parent, birth and all that entails, the difficulties that come with growth, that all of that is a part of life, and that we can embrace that and love that. And I feel like that's when some people say, well, all religions are, the different roads to the same truth. I feel like a lot of times, I mean, we can address that at two levels, but that's in practice. That is the practice that they're talking about, that we withdraw the projections and that we engage in a dance instead.
Yeah, so it's like the main idea of it is similar, right, between the religions. And then, but in the fourth quadrant, we're getting out this sense of duality thinking, in that we recognize that the other is also valuable in some sort of way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And Jung said that looking across cultures, he believed that pretty much all cultures, human cultures, made room for all of these four chakras in some way, and that they were built in a way to the human experience. There's no reason, unless we're deliberately like distracted, programmed, whatever it is, to not experience these four. Everybody has the possibility to experience love, complementarity, vulnerability, the discovery of truth, the illumination of who they are, their best fit self, the joy of having fun, it's village life, all of that. Where he said what he felt was different in the modern world is the fifth chakra, and that the modern world was is much an aspiration as it was a reality. And so the way he describes the fifth chakra, which sits at the throat, Vishuddha, and the throat chakra really extends from here down through here. And he talks about how the energy comes out. What allows us to talk? We have to use our lungs to breathe. It's part of talking. And where does the energy come from that? Well, we eat and so on, and the energy that is turned in the solar plexus area into heat. And so he uses this metaphor of the heating it heats the air that allows it to come up. And so he describes at this point is we're still even when we go to the fifth chakra, we're still very tied to the rest of the chakras. But otherwise, he said what's unique about the fifth chakra is that words, for the first time, we can talk about things that are completely unreal. And in fact, using words, we can consider an infinity of things almost. And that is what allows for, not just books and the writing and teaching and passing knowledge from one generation to the next, but science and technology and democracy and all of these sort of modern inventions, because we enter a place with words and education, and that is not necessarily available to everyone, but at least most societies, and certainly today, everybody listening, societies provide that. They can also provide false words and false knowledge. And he said psychologically, the really cool thing that's so amazing about the fifth function, the fifth chakra, is that he described it like a bird. That part of us, when we speak, it's like a bird that takes off into the wind. And it can see things that we wouldn't see otherwise. And in fact, that bird, using it, we can see ourselves. So he said, imagine that you have some kind of he didn't use the word mental model, but imagine you have some kind of mental model, any kind of therapeutic framework, for example. Let's say that's object relations or transactional analysis or depth psychology. You can use that model to analyze yourself. That model is the bird that sees you. And this is the first time we're oh, and of course that's what a lot of the scientific process is about. And that's even the assumption behind democracy, equal application of the law. There's a model called the law. And I don't mean just going to court law, I mean the way that society is structured. And that is some kind of objective standard to which we hold everyone.
Yes.
And we have to hold everyone equally to that. Otherwise, our natural propensity, he said, is to say, I'm special, or I feel differently, or, no, I see the truth and you don't. And so he really described this fifth chakra as very, it has minuses, but it has a lot of pluses with it.
So it's kind of a proto version of the transcendent function in a way. It's an early version of being able to kind of look at your ego and also provide a framework and kind of be able to stand above it.
Yeah.
So to a limited degree at this level.
Yeah. Now, for the last two chakras, it's sort of interesting because with the sixth one, he talks about it two different ways. He talks very briefly about what it means in the traditions, very briefly. And then he goes on, and mostly then he places his own work, depth psychology or analytical psychology, within the sixth chakra. He's saying this is where this kind of work that I'm doing or aspiring to do, this is where this sits. And it includes a whole range of things. In theory, it's sitting here as a third eye. Third eye means that it sees inward and potentially, so it's not just outward, it's seeing internally some kind of perfection, truth in not an objective truth from the sky, but in a kind of wisdom. And I would say the great example, there are two examples. One of them is in the Bible, King Solomon. And the two mothers come to King Solomon with one baby, both claiming to be the baby's mother, when in fact one of them, their baby, had died. And then the bad mother had actually switched her baby with the other one, and all this stuff happened. They come to King Solomon to resolve. And King Solomon says, well, I don't know what to do, and I don't know who's telling the truth, so I'm going to cut the baby in half. And each of you get half the baby. And the good mother was like, no, no, no. She's like, I'd rather you not, I get no baby than you kill the baby. Whereas the bad mother said, oh, fine, okay, you can do that. And so King Solomon had this like tricky or counterintuitive sort of wisdom about how to deal with these two people. And the same in Greek mythology with Minerva as the goddess of wisdom and justice who emerges out of Zeus's head, wholly formed. And with her symbol is the owl. And, this owl is even in the darkness, the owl has the senses and the acuity, as a carnivore, by the way, to be able to swoop onto something and to grab it, to notice it and to grab it. It can also be dreams. And this is, he said, because most of our, certainly modern society, modern Western society in particular, he was saying, has tried to, it doesn't create any framework of experience for the sixth chakra. It can happen to people randomly or under very special circumstances. But generally speaking, they'll have like an out-of-body experience, or they'll have like a very strange, like incredibly vivid dream. They'll have what feels like seeing a ghost, or they'll have like this brilliant flash of intuition. That this is like the story of how benzene was discovered, that the guy had a dream of a snake eating its own tail. And he's like, oh, benzene is a circle. The molecule is a circle. So he's like, it can happen this way, but our societies have not reached a point. And by the way, he felt that, quote, primitive societies actually had just as or even more access to this chakra than people did now in the Western world.
When you're saying this, it makes me think like when we're operating in the fifth chakra, which society attempts to do right now, is that it's still very cognitive. Like you have to actively create the frameworks by which to understand things. And at this sixth chakra level, you're trusting your own insight. You're trusting your unconscious, and it seems to cost less energy in a way.
Yeah. And so I would say it's interesting to look at the like I've seen like some tables of chakras that are used in a practical way, like the Hindu guru, like, for people, like this is what chakra you're in and when you're doing this and so on, and describing like the wise person, like the wise head of the family or the wise village elders, that when they come from this place of wisdom, you can't just be like, well, you give this decision, explain logically why this is the case. That's absurd to them, because they're like, I can't explain to you objectively like 70 years of experience of how I arrived at this. There's an intuitive feeling that comes with it. And the same when people have some kind of extraordinary experience, like they go and they do like, they go to the jungle and they do ayahuasca for a week and come back. I mean, that's like, what was the description? Is like being an astronaut that goes into space and comes back.
Right.
And
they call it a psychonaut.
Yeah, a psychonaut. In this case, though, we cannot live in the vacuum of space. In the ether, we cannot live there. We have to wear a suit. And so when we have these six chakra experiences, either we know how to live in there in spirit, or we sort of cheat. We take like a little, like, like we have a special experience. And I think this is why when you look at like a meditation retreat, or even the therapeutic office, the therapist's office is a special container. And that container is like going into space.
Right.
And they're exploring stuff, and they're like, oh, you're right. And they're allowing themselves to they're allowing stuff from the unconscious to come out. And then they go back to their normal life.
Yes.
But Jung said, he said, don't despair, because he said every journey that a person takes like that, even though they come back down to earth in a way, to the fifth chakra or even the second chakra or whatever it is, that they carry some of that experience with them. because it's still affecting the whole body and the whole nervous system. And in the tradition, the third eye associated with the pituitary is sort of like the master endocrine gland that sends out hormones that affect neurotransmitters, hormones that affect the whole rest of the body and all of its other glands. And
Right.
so there's like this quality. It's like you have that strange dream and you wake from it and you're like shaking and you remember something from it, and that's it's temporary and it's a journey, but it also affected the whole person.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I find that to be true. So working as a psychotherapist, one thing I notice is that clients, they come in and they learn something from the session, and they feel like what they've learned they have to always actively keep in their mind here, like all the psychological tools and how much effort that is to always keep it up here. And the thing I really want them to know is that they are storing it.
So it's no, the seventh chakra is actually, his description of it is what got me to start the whole project in the first place. Because I started reading it, and I'll read a quote here from Jung talking about the seventh chakra, and it's just short. It's, I mean, he wrote, he talked, it's like several paragraphs, but he said, Jung explains that the person who was but a seed in the first chakra is now, quote, in the full blazing white light, fully conscious. The God that has been dormant in Muladhara, which is the first chakra, is the seed, is here fully awake, the only reality. And he said, even in the sixth chakra, which is sort of a higher dimension, there's still a you. But here, you're in a higher dimension, an astral self beyond space and time, emotion and reason. I'm saying this part of it, and then I quote him again. You are, quote, one with the psychological realm rather than an appendage of it.
Yes.
The center of the unio mystica with the power of God, meaning the absolute reality where one is nothing but psychic reality, yet confronted with the psychic reality that one is not. And that is God. God is the eternal psychical object.
Wow.
So in other words, the sense of self disappears. It's a non-dual experience, is what he's describing, and that white light experience is what people describe when they are doing, if they've done sufficiently and they've gotten to this point, when they're doing these body-mind practices, when they're able to enter this non-dual space from meditation. 5-MeO-DMT is like a very quick shortcut to have that experience. That there's consciousness that's total, and yet there's no personal identity or attachment to anything in existence. And we might think that personal identity and memory are necessary for consciousness, but apparently that's false. Because people really do this absorption and total inclusion in this white light, and there's still a consciousness that says, "Oh, I'm in this white light," but there actually is no I anymore, and there's no thought of I. And then as people come out of that experience, by whatever means they got in there, they're reintroduced to themselves in this life all over again. Oh, I'm a person sitting in an ashram or wherever in the jungle. Like my name is Leon or Dario. Da. And then people have an option sometimes to think like, oh, that part of me, I don't know if I need that. And it's, what's interesting is that a lot of people report that it might be smooth, like transition, like it just happens at some point, or it could be a death experience, which is quite terrifying, and that the person has to surrender to death, and that they awaken on the other side, but there's no they. And so this is really like the ultimate experience and the reminder. And some people may only have this once in their entire life for 1 minute, and then that's it. They may have it 5 minutes before they die. They may experience it 20 times because they engage in some kind of practice that helps take them into that space. And that's the space that really is like, oh, all of these attachments, all this baggage I'm carrying, And that's the essence, I would say, the difference between East and West in this case is that the Western approaches to self-help. I don't necessarily mean psychotherapy, but I mean self-help. The concept of the Western concept of self-improvement or growth or healing is always about making the ego more sophisticated.
Right.
And the Eastern approach with the chakras is ultimately you want to arrive at the place where you just discard everything. Because actually you never needed any of it because you already knew everything you needed to know.
Interesting. One thing I was curious because you mentioned in a book that when you are in that seventh chakra, you could access the other chakras at will. So the image that comes to my mind is like when you're able to see yourself beyond yourself, that all these other chakras become tools. They're not like central to the ego's importance anymore. You see them as, oh, this is a way of being that I could tap into and meet a certain need at a moment.
I would say yes, and it takes more practice than it probably is much or more than it sounds even.
Mm-hmm.
And the Buddhist saying is like, what do you do after enlightenment? Before enlightenment, you what is it? You chop wood and carry water, and after enlightenment, you chop wood and carry water. So
Yes.
the practical parts continue, and then in terms of accessing that stuff, it really that's what daily practice is about. And I can think back even a couple of years ago. I got very very busy. I had 3 interns. It was in that period of January, which is always crazy for me because everybody thinks that now is a perfect time to contact Dario, for whatever, like courses and interviews and like all of these things, which is great. It's the new year. But I neglected all of my practices. I wasn't going to yoga. I wasn't doing breath work. I wasn't microdosing. I wasn't doing anything like that. And I really got to a point where I didn't even notice how much I had deteriorated in my perspective. I kept thinking in my head, oh, yeah, I know this stuff. I mean, after all, I wrote the book, right? But in practice, I had actually lost the ability to hold that. And I needed to start then like all over again and like completely like really throw myself into it in order to get to that. And that was already then after 5 or 6 years of engaging in regular practice. And all the time now, there's a reason why I am watching The Stand right now, the newest version. Mother Abigail is, supposed to be this holy follower of God and all of that. Yeah, she's crotchety and old and irritable like, anybody else. But she has this connection to this divine essence that's just very special. And so I see that's not to compare myself to Mother Abigail, but I could see that anybody who takes this kind of path, it's almost like physician heal thyself. Every therapist's first patient is themselves. Every healer is a wounded healer. Like there's a lot of different ways to say it, depending upon the tradition and all of that, and that's why I see the value of it. Otherwise, it's very easy to get caught up in the fifth chakra or the third chakra, in particular, and forget that somehow cognitively we remember, but we don't. We lose the connection of the whole, of being in the whole, and that's. I don't know if everybody needs to go to that, but I would say if at the very least people can get to the point where they can just get out the trauma from the body, that's like really, really important. And then that's step one. And then step two, to remember that when they reach the shore, from the shipwreck and the sun rises, that doesn't mean that they've reached the final shore and that's the truth, in the third chakra. And I see that all the time. And at the very least, let's just truly hold ourselves up to the standard of the fifth chakra, or just live our lives. I think that's why so many people towards the end of life assuming that they lived a rich life, not necessarily a happy life, but a rich one, that the heart will have been exercised enough that they will at least find that resource is like really, really that's what comes first, and that's or the second, and that's as opposed to being down here, and that's and Jung said it was a challenge because so many people in the West think they're up here,
Right.
and what drives them is down here, and they're disconnected from it, like there's a plate that disconnects
There's
them.
some separation between the lower half and the upper half.
Yeah,
And what you see is like where the main energy now in the world and in society is in the third chakra, and in the best where we're going through right now is like a transformation that will take us to the fourth chakra, and that's where the focus is. And that's why Christianity and Buddhism are focused on the fourth in a way. And then and people think that they're in the fifth, but it's like that's just like the outer dressing of society. But really, people are operating at third. And I think I mentioned to you before. That's why we have egotistic scientists, because they're able to operate using the language of the fifth, but they're still serving themselves.
yeah, and many people are also in the second chakra, and it's interesting. I think it's important from a sort of a therapeutic point of view, although I'm not a therapist, to at least I pay attention to where is the material that's in the second chakra being expressed. And people can express that different ways. So, like Hemingway, for example, was an alcoholic, and he felt that that helped his work. The suffering artist. So people can take their suffering and they can transform it and direct it in a way into their artistry. Another way is that people can try and, which I think what often happens is they try and bury it. And the act of keeping it buried and the doors closed ends up taking more energy than simply releasing it. But the fear, the terror of releasing it is so great that they don't know what to do. Um, and the third option is to try and drink it away, so to speak. That I'm going to engage in pleasures, and I'm going to try and, besides the pain, I'm going to try and bring up the pleasure level in order to, like, submerge all of the bad stuff, and the partying and the dancing, which are not bad in and of themselves. Um, and then the fourth is to weaponize it. And I think every society goes through these phases where there's like a popular way of dealing with things. So like in the 50s, a lot of it was about burying it. And you listen to older people and who came back from, say, World War II and experienced very difficult things, you just bury it, you don't talk about it. And then there was like, oh yeah, let's just express ourselves and live wild and free. And but that has a cost too. And I think now we're in this place of a lot of people carry stuff. I mean, in part because the society itself, the lifestyle is so disconnected from the physical world, from reality. From, I mean, reality meaning like tangible feedback. We don't live in small villages. We're not petting animals and touching the earth with our bare feet, and so they weaponize it, and it becomes, and the hurt is reshaped into a spear, and then that's what carries the person from the second into the third chakra. But in many cases, even then, they're not really in the third chakra. They're like in this liminal space in between because they don't know themselves yet, even. They're just spear holders, on the march of truth as like a tribe members. And so I think what I'm saying is like we can get more nuance with it and ask like what are the ways that they can express, whether we freeze it out or try and turn it into something through sublimation or like whatever it is, projected onto others. And so it's a very rich framework.
Yeah. So a problem is like when people try to conceptualize it in a very linear way, that the whole point is to climb the chakra system, and when you're up a chakra, then you could forget about everything that's below it. And it's important to actually see the value of all the chakras, and and there's ways that the lower chakras are valuable that the higher chakras, they don't have that kind of value.
Yeah, and I think it's one reason why a lot of spiritual practices, you see them go in one of two directions. Either they become very body focused at the same time as the spiritual practice to keep that person connected, whether they realize that or not. To keep the person grounded in a way. And the other is then some other traditions where it becomes purely like mental exercise. So I think like Kabbalah, for example, has two different ways sort of you can go. One way is going to be like meditation and there's a body stuff and so on. And then there's another where it's like a purely cognitive kind of thing. And it's analysis and you're fitting these items on the tree of life and assigning things. And it's like the person is like a floating head. And you look at their body and you can see like, oh, like the body is worthless to them in a way, but the body has so much wisdom in it. And when we neglect that wisdom, it actually takes us away from then we still are living in the theater of the mind.
Yes. Yeah, so it's basically the issue of throwing the baby out with bathwater.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, whereas the converse, if you're just living in the bottom chakras and you don't go up, then of course you're missing something too.
Right.
And people can easily be, for example, in the third chakra and look down and see like, oh, all those dumb sheep in the first and second chakra,
right.
Or all of society's problems are caused by this or that below them, and they haven't actually had enough life experience to go upward and see like. I mean, this is. I think a lot of times you talk to somebody, say when they're 20, and then you revisit them 30 years later after they've been married and then divorced and remarried and they had 2 kids and this and that. And the chance, I mean, their perspective is probably going to be richer than when they were 20.
Right.
It's not assured. They might have become very cynical in the process, but they probably also have a lot of wisdom that they gained along the way, at least enough for their own lives. And so it's the challenge of being able to see upward. And that's what I think of the benefit is like why, we see this like line that's there. It's not just the physical line of the spine and the nervous system running up and down the spine, although that's the case, is that remind us to look up and to look down.
Yes.
And to breathe upward and to breathe downward. Mm-hmm. And that's just an outward and so on. Yeah.
Okay. And all right. So, is there anything you would like to share in terms of what kind of ways that you could start activating or working with the chakras in a very tangible way?
Well, there are different approaches. So what are some practices that people can pursue in order to take advantage of some of this work? That's really the accumulation. We know the current chakra conceptualization goes back minimum to the 14th century. I mean, it was there before that, but the way it's sort of arranged and so on. And really goes back to the Vedas much earlier than that. So we're talking about like 3,000-4,000 years ago. Yes. This knowledge is continued. So one is to engage in any kind of tradition that is connected with that. And I would say, oh yeah, you can consider yoga, but the challenge is in the United States, most of the yoga is exercise yoga and is not related to, that it's good, like it helps the person connect to their body, but that's about it. There's a joke in the Kundalini yoga community that you can spend 3 years doing Kundalini yoga, or you can spend 30 years doing Hatha yoga. The choice is up to you. So different schools emphasize it more or less. I would say any body-mind practice that helps the person connect. There's a wonderful practice called holotropic breath work. There's also shamanic breath work. They're fairly similar to each other. They came about from researchers traveling around looking at indigenous societies and different techniques. And like I went to a holotropic breathwork retreat a few years ago, and you do this deep, heavy breathing that causes essentially like hyperoxygenation of the blood. It can be done for a short period of time, like 30 or 40 minutes. It can be done for longer. We did 3-hour sessions which were really tremendous. And then eventually that sends the brain to a state which completely just shuts off the default network and allows material to come in. And there are sitters and facilitators there that really move around and help people, because inevitably a lot of people have very emotional and even psychologically challenging, like physically challenging experiences. Um, and that's just breathing. And my joke is breathing is free and legal everywhere in the world except maybe North Korea. Um, so that's it. It does help though to have a facilitator with it in order to help with that. Jung himself offered this technique called active imagination because he felt that the Western world was not ready for yoga as it was practiced in India, and what we've ended up with, 100 years later or so, is a hybrid of the two. There's the Wim Hof method, which includes both breath work and like ice baths and that kind of stuff, which is an amazing experience. Just the breath work. I would say whatever you try, you need to dedicate. I mean, that's like a standard mind body experience that doesn't include like mushrooms or LSD or something like that, which is just you breathing and it's facilitated, meditating, whatever it is. Vipassana yoga, if you have to sit all day long for 3 days without saying anything and you have to keep sitting, boy, your mind is going to go places.
Yeah.
And always give at least 10 minutes for whatever it is. I love in Kundalini, a lot of exercises are minimum 11 minutes. Why is it 11? That's not just like because they like the number 11 or something. It's because it seems that there's resistance. And the brain is like, why are you doing this? And there's a point, which is roughly 10 minutes in for human beings, that once we get past that point, the brain's like, oh, okay, we're going for a ride. Let's do that. And then the person stops noticing the passage of time, and they shift into a different experience. There was a meta study that was done on mindfulness. And these were all mindfulness studies that were managed through universities with, all of the standard like human subject research protocol and all of that. And they found that in throughout over the studies that roughly 1/4 of people who engaged in these mindfulness activities had a bad experience. And so the researchers concluded that maybe this mindfulness stuff isn't all that it's chalked up to be, and it has pitfalls that people need to know about to avoid. Yes. I just have to laugh. And anybody who's been serious in this just has to laugh, because it's like, yeah, like bad stuff came up. Like that means it's working. It also maybe means that you didn't get the therapeutic support, the facilitative support that you needed, and so it's incomplete, but that actually means it was a success.
Yes.
That step of it. And so that's, I think it's too easy to dismiss in the Western mind that therapy is defined as being like a pill, but it's talking and takes longer. Yes. Or whatever it is. And it's like, no, that's actually not what it is. There's an inner healer, an inner storyteller, an inner journey, as well as an outer one that people need to engage in and engage that. And we have that built into us. And the chakras are a framework, not just to describe physically, like, why am I experiencing the strange sensations around my heart? I'm not having a heart attack or heartburn. Like, that's actually a result of, the nervous system. But it awakens us to this idea that there's a journey. And that the journey includes things like releasing trauma.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for talking about this subject about the chakras, and it's really fascinating. It's really in depth too, your understanding of the system.
Yeah, somehow that happened. I don't know how, because I'm not a therapist. I do hang around with therapists. I do neuroscience research. I feel like just Jung talked to really the right yogis or gurus. Yes. And really knew what he was talking about, and I had just enough experience to like get on that wavelength.
Yes.
And that's And I feel that the hope is, I have a colleague, for example, in Southern California, and she teaches yoga and breath work and that kind of stuff to elementary school kids. And what an amazing resource! Like, if only everybody was taught this resource in school. Yeah, instead of having more programming.
Yes, because then we have to unlearn bad habits.
Yeah, yeah, and there's well, don't as an educator, don't get me on the topic of education. That's a whole other topic.
Okay. So thank you for coming on my channel, Dario.
Thanks for having me. Absolutely, thank you, Leon.